Good morning, everyone, and welcome into the 2025 Florida Gators preview. Before we get into 2025, I'm just going to kind of go over some brief highlights of how 2024 started to how it ended, and just some of the storylines that we saw play out throughout the season that will carry over into this season. I personally think there's a lot of optimism going into the 2025 season. We have a lot of talented freshmen coming in through this year's recruiting class. I think Napier once again has proven that he is far and away one of the best recruiters we've ever seen, at least at Florida. And I'll throw it in there because there's a lot of head coaches out there that still manage to out-recruit him, given the struggles with Mullen and coaches of previous tenure. And I personally think that Napier's done a good job. But with that being said, we're just going to kind of go over 2024 and see how that all played out, and then see how that carries over to 2025. So let's get into it. All right, so allow me to preface my 2024 recap with probably the hottest take of all time. One of my hottest takes, I guess. Now, I know that there's a lot of people within the fan base that will agree with me, and people that don't like Florida, they're just going to laugh and spit in my face on this one. But my hot take is that if this team had started the season the way we finished it, we would have probably won 11 games. At very minimum, you win 10 games. The Texas game, I think we still were outmatched. Given we had DJ, I still think we would have been outmatched. They just have too much skill, too much speed. So the Texas game, I think either way, that's a foregone conclusion. That would have probably been a loss. But I truly think that if we had started the 2024 season with how we finished it, because there was a turning point with this season where you look at the defense, and that was one of the huge turnarounds for this team this season. Because if you think back to week one, you've got Cam Ward coming into the swamp, sold out week one, and he comes in and throws for 400 yards. Xavier Restrepo comes in, 7 receptions, 102 yards, I believe he had, a touchdown or two. I mean, they beat our ass. I mean, they came in and they throttled us. But then you also have to account that the offense wasn't doing as good. The defense obviously couldn't stop a parked car that game because Cam Ward came in and just did what he wanted. And you didn't have, DJ as QB1. And I think that again, and if you had this ending result at your starting point, defense playing lights out, the aggressiveness is there, the offense is playing better, the DJ is quarterback one. I mean, you're not shooting yourself in the foot with stupid penalties. Just all those things culminate to at least a 10-win season, at least in my opinion. So we probably would have beat Miami. We would have handled Texas A&M very well, I think. That game just kind of got away from us. We really just came out flat from the very start, and it just didn't look good. Then for some reason, it's always Texas A&M for us that seems to be that pain in our ass, because we go in there and there's some matchups in recent games that we've been favored and we've been picked, and we just come out there and we just look flat. Like, we come out there looking like we got drunk the night before and we're walking in hungover. Like, it just, something about that game against them in recent years, like the Malik Davis fumble in 2020, that would ultimately prove to be costly for our whole season, because that was the season where, Marco Wilson literally and figuratively tossed our playoff hopes out the window. So, I mean, there's just a lot of things that went into that. And so that game we definitely should have won. And then Tennessee, this is a rivalry that just irritates me to my core. And I have a lot of people close to me that are Tennessee fans that support them, and they just refuse to hear it. That Trey Smack doesn't miss that field goal if we don't shoot ourselves in the foot. Once again, if DJ comes into that game as QB1 playing the way he did to close out the season, we would have handled them, because there was nothing generationally special with that Tennessee team. And I'll just lay that out there. So people in the comments that are Tennessee fans, you can go argue with a brick wall. And then the Georgia game. This is probably one of the most painful things I've ever had to watch. If DJ Lagway does not get injured in that game, we win that game. Not by much, because, and even though Georgia had a down year by their standards, they still would have kept it close with us. But I truly believe that if DJ did not get injured, we keep the momentum, and the defense keeps playing the way they were, we would have won that game. Maybe by a score, maybe 10 points, but nothing more than that. So overall, I mean, you just got to look at what has culminated this season and from where we started to how we finished. I mean, the way we finished was absolutely fantastic. I mean, your last 3 games, you get 2 ranked wins, and then you go into Doak Campbell and you stomp Florida State. I mean, they had one of the largest falls from grace that we've ever seen in college football, given where they started last year to how they finished this year. I mean, it was bad. But nonetheless, I mean, we'll take the season that we had given the circumstances. And I know that there's a lot of Florida fans out there that are happy going into this season, given what we saw last season. So I think, all things considered, and if you're able to build off of what you ended with last season, 2025 will be very special for us. So, all right. So you start 2025, week 1, you're at home against Long Island University. Not much of a game there, honestly. They're from the NEC conference, finished 4-8 this season. I personally don't see them being a challenge. Now, I do think in this game we will see a lot of underclassmen play. We'll see a lot of true freshmen come into the game. We've seen this time and time again with a lot of schools. They kind of use this as, and I wouldn't say a tryout game, but it's kind of a film game. You kind of get to see how these guys play and game speed, things like that. So expect to see a lot of Florida's young talent playing this game, but otherwise I don't see other highlights coming from this one. Florida wins by a minimum of 3 scores, and you go into week 2 1-0. Week 2, we have South Florida at home, and again, this is a game that I don't really think is too troublesome. I mean, they're a good program. They've had some up and down seasons in recent memory. Finished 7-6 this past year. We played them a couple years ago with Anthony Richardson as our quarterback, but personally, this game I think is another one of those games where you get some film on some guys. There's going to be a lot of contribution from the true freshmen, and I think we handle this one easily. Not as easily as Long Island, but I do think we pull away and we win by a couple of scores. So Florida easily begins 2025 2-0. All right, week 3. This is where things start to get a little bit tricky. Week 3, we're in Death Valley playing against LSU. Now, to backtrack to 2024, again, one of the best games I saw all year from us. The defense was able to step up when they needed to, and they did take some late game heroics from us to pull that game out, much like the Ole Miss game, but nonetheless, we got it done. Now, for this game in 2025, once again, we're going into Death Valley, which is arguably the hardest place to play in college football, by far the hardest place to play in the SEC. And again, this game just comes down to execution. I truthfully don't know which way this game is going to swing because we haven't seen anything yet, obviously, from either team. Both rosters are incredibly talented, the incredible production from their underclassmen, a great group of seniors on both sides of the ball, 2 very capable quarterbacks on both ends. So this game, honestly, will just be like most big games. It comes down to your turnover margin and which team controls the ball. And honestly, if Florida comes in and we look rocky and we allow the crowd to get a hold of us early, this game's going to get out of hand. And I think LSU is going to walk away with this one handily. But let's say for all intents and purposes that we go in there composed, we're ready, we execute well to the best of our ability. I truthfully will give Florida the nod on this one. Again, this game will not be a wide margin. This game, it honestly might come down to a field goal. But I think for right now, we're going to give the win to Florida. Now, again, this will hinder on how the team looks in the previous 2 games. But right now, I'm gonna stick with my guns, and we're gonna go Florida. I'm gonna say we win by 3 or 4 points. So week 4, we're heading to South Beach to run that back with the Canes in front of all 15 of their fans. This game, I think, is undoubtedly one of the biggest on the schedule if you're a Florida player, because you cannot forget what happened last season. I mean, they came in, they whooped us all 4 directions, north, south, east, and west, and then back again for 4 quarters. This is a game that I think will set the tone for the rest of the season. If you come in flat and we lose, 2 years in a row to them, I think that will decide, the fate for a lot of the energy going forward with this season, because the schedule is only going to get tougher. I mean, think of the gauntlet schedule we had to run this past year. Well, flip it around, we had to run it again this year. So This game will ultimately set the tone for the remainder of this season, but I don't think the result will be anywhere close to how last season's was, because again, the team's playing a lot different. Last year we played a lot different towards the end of the season, and like I said earlier, if Miami had played us later, we would have beat them probably by 4 scores, because towards the end Miami faltered. We saw it with Georgia Tech and Syracuse, which ultimately cost them a spot in the ACC championship game. And shit happens. But this season, I think, is a get-back game for us, and I think we come in and we overwhelm them and we walk out with a victory. So I think Florida gets their revenge and we start off 4-0. This is a game that I would probably put as top 3 on our schedule. We have Texas coming to Gainesville. As you guys know, last year we had no DJ Lagway in that game. Aiden Warner went in there and got smothered for 4 quarters. We got absolutely obliterated. This game, I think, is one of those get-back games, but I also don't think that, this game is as important for our team morale as the Miami game the previous week will be. Nonetheless, this game is going to be absolute cinema. You've got 2 of the best young quarterbacks, not only in the SEC, but in the entire country. We're going to see Arch Manning go up against DJ Lagway. I hope to God this game is in prime time. This is a game that I personally have scheduled on my schedule to go down to attend. Now, I do think that if this is another one of those games that's a big if, you put a giant asterisk next to it, if we execute our game plan perfectly, and perfectly is an understatement. The defense has to play lights out. We have to put pressure on Arch. The offense has to execute, because Texas has so much speed on both sides of the ball. We have to have a flawless game plan, and we have to execute it perfectly. And let's say we do that, then we win this game. Again, this is not going to be a game that's decided by many points. This is going to be a 1-score game, like throughout the entire game. But ultimately, I do think that Texas comes in and they squeak out a win. Again, this game's probably going to be by 3 points, maybe 6 points. But I do think Texas will come out of here with a win. Wow, the SEC wanted to keep it Texas themed 2 weeks in a row, because we're playing Texas A&M the following week. This game, much different than Texas. I think that we have a better roster than them. I think that we execute better in this game. And, despite the environment at Kyle Field, I think DJ is going to be composed, and I truly think that we'll handle our business in there, and we'll get our first win against them since 2022. Not much to say on this game. I just think Florida will outmuscle them, will outperform them, and we'll get a much-needed road win. So, following Texas A&M, we have a game that we won last year pretty decisively. We're going to Stark Vegas, and unfortunately, it's not going to be a different result for them. We're going to win this game. This is a game that I think we go into, we're incredibly overpowered compared to them. We have a much better quarterback, much better skill players. Florida handles their business in Stark Vegas. I think we win by 2 to 3 scores easily. Once again, this is just one of those games where I think you have 2 programs going in different directions. Florida is trending upwards, and Mississippi State, they've been down ever since Mike Leach passed away. And these are just 2, like I said, 2 programs. They're just trending opposite, and I think that's going to show on the field. Florida wins this game pretty easily. All right, coming off of our second bye week of the season, Saturday, November 1st, 2025, Florida will defeat Georgia. And that might be a flaming hot take for some people. For others, it's not that far off. And truthfully, last year we should have beat them. Last year we had them. We struck first. The defense was flying around, generating pressure, playing like I haven't seen since probably 2020 when we last beat them. Sadly, DJ got injured, and that changed the entire momentum, and we just couldn't do anything after that. It's no knock to Aiden Warner, but there's not much you can do in his situation. It was just an unfortunate circumstance. But I think this year, the attitude will be different. Much like it was this past year, people were coming in pissed off. The whole Trevor Etienne transferring thing, I know that motivated a lot of guys, especially on defense. And then you saw it. The defense was going around hitting people. The aggression was very noticeably different, compared to past years. And you would think, that when you compare these 2 programs the last couple of years, that one program was FBS and one program was FCS. Because when you look at Georgia's success the last 4 or 5 years, I mean, they've won 2 national titles, whereas Florida has been downward spiral, and we've been slowly rebuilding. And I really do think that this is the year that Napier gets it done, and he finally silences the doubters, and we finally defeat Georgia. It's a big win for him. It's a huge win for the university, and truthfully, that'll be a huge recruiting win. So yeah, and I truthfully think that Florida will defeat Georgia. Now the game won't come down to a field goal, but it won't be a very decisive, 2 or 3 score win. I honestly think Florida gets it done by 7. I can see this being a 1 touchdown game, but I really don't think it's going to be a game-winning field goal or a blowout on either side. Just give me Florida by 7. So this will be the year that Florida finally gets it done against Georgia, and that's my flaming hot take for the day. This is such an interesting rivalry to me because, I mean, when you look at this from just an overall perspective, this rivalry is historically Florida dominated. I think the overall series right now, trying to remember, is 54-21, and we have absolutely owned this series in football. I mean, pretty much for the entirety of it. But in recent years, this seems to be one of those games that we just couldn't seem to pull out. And luckily, we were able to get over the hump and finally beat them this past season. But for the 3 years prior to that those games would just piss everybody off in this fan base because they were games that we shouldn't have lost. Like, those are games where you have special teams blunders, you have penalties that kill you, like, just stupid mistakes. And truthfully, the only way that I can compare Kentucky is they're kind of like Iowa. So I went to the University of Iowa, and for anyone that watches college football, they're such a tough out, despite their offense being, comically funny. Like, the defense is so disciplined, and they make very little mistakes. And for the 3-game span, that we played Kentucky, that they beat us, it just seemed that was the case. Like, they played lights out, they forced us to make stupid decisions, turnovers, that was just how it was for the past 3 years. But outside of that, this rivalry has been historically dominated by Florida, and I truthfully see it going back to that. Kentucky, they had kind of a down year, and these aren't 2 programs that are completely trending opposite, but I think it's starting to kind of hit that wishbone, that crossroads where they're going to start to venture off. Florida has, they have a lot of momentum coming into this season. They have their quarterback for the next couple of years. Very talented recruiting class coming in. They're trending upward. But then you've got Kentucky, which they portal well, and they've had a pretty good portal class to this point. Recruiting was kind of, so far this cycle. Then given the results of this past season, they're kind of beginning to veer off this way a little bit. Now we'll see, what Coach Mark Stoops has in plan for them this season. And, they could have a bounce back year. I think Florida goes into Kroger Field and we win 2 in a row. We're nearing the end of the 2025 season. We're going to Oxford to play Ole Miss. And for those that can think back to this past season, that was a high drama game. It took a few interceptions with a final minute left. Phenomenal game. That was one of the best games I've seen in a couple of years with Florida. The way the defense rose up, offense didn't have their best game, but nonetheless, we got it done. Fans showed out, everything. It gave you everything you wanted. Being a Florida fan, you got high drama, you got a defensive stand every now and then. I mean, the game was just very, very well executed. Like I said, the game was not without mistakes, but overall, I think from a fan perspective, you got the win. You upset a top 10 team. Take what you can get. But I think this time around, things will be a little bit different. This is a game that makes me a little bit uneasy, just because of the way that Ole Miss has portaled and they're recruiting. And then, they're going to have another quarterback coming in, very electric. Austin Simmons, who, fun fact, was at one point a Florida commit, would later flip to Ole Miss. And I think that Lane Kiffin's just done a good job there. Plus we're going to be on the road. I'm not saying that that's going to be a huge problem for us. We're definitely going to be playing in bigger environments throughout the season. But I do think that combined with their skill and their speed and just the way that they've schemed things up down there with their offense, I think Ole Miss, they do prevail at home. It's not going to be a blowout win by any means. There's really no game on the schedule that I look at as 100% we're going to get killed. Like, that's nothing that I've really thought of looking at the schedule right now, at least. Now we'll know more, obviously, after the spring game and just seeing how, reports are circulating from inside the facilities and things like that. But this game, I'm going to go with Ole Miss. I think it's maybe a 3-point margin. At most, I would say 10 points. When it comes to the Tennessee game this coming year, this is going to be one of the more interesting matchups, because when you think back to last year, you think of the game where Graham Mertz goes down and his career ends, unfortunately, and then DJ Lagway comes in and we ride the ship with him the rest of the season. And that situation for a lot of Florida fans is very similar to the Felipe Franks and Kyle Trask situation a couple years ago. Felipe goes down with injury, and then, Kyle comes in, we ride the ship with him, and the man nearly wins a Heisman the following year. So, the situations are somewhat parallel. Now, they're not, completely the same. Felipe transferred after his injury. Graham Mertz is going to graduate. DJ's talent was already there, whereas no one really knew who Kyle Trask was at that time. So, they're different, but ultimately the tone is kind of the same. And that was a game last year. I really think that we let it get away from us. You had the missed field goal, and then you had the penalties, and there was just a lot happening in that game. And, one has to wonder, what would our season look like if Graham Mertz never got injured? Would we have finished better? Would we have finished worse? Me personally, no disrespect to Graham Mertz, but DJ Lagway was always quarterback one. And, you could kind of see it right in front of your eyes with every game that DJ was playing since becoming the starter, that the offense just started to flow and the throws were easier, and, just keeping plays alive. And, like, that playmaking ability for him is a lot more prevalent than it was with Graham. Again, no disrespect to Graham Mertz, but one has to wonder, what would our final record have been if Graham didn't get injured during that Tennessee game. But nonetheless, looking forward to the 2025 matchup. We're in Gainesville. This is a game that I will be at. So I'm trying to make it down for a couple of Florida games this year, but this is one that I definitely have circled on my schedule. I personally think that Tennessee, they're going to regress a little bit coming into next year. They're coming in to a crazy environment. The Swamp, obviously, one of the hardest places to play in the nation, one of the top 3 hardest places to play in the SEC. And I think Florida gets it done. We get our revenge for last year, and we keep moving. So Florida gets a win. And to finish up our 2025 campaign, we keep it at home against Florida State. And truthfully, this is a game where I don't see the outcome being much different than 2024. I think Florida State, they've got a long way to go to recover from their horrible 2-11 season this year. They did get Thomas Castellanos to portal from Boston College. Now, I don't think he's a tremendous upgrade from DJU. It's not like you're going from a Camaro to a Bentley. It's more like you're going from an F-150 to a Raptor. It's the same class, just a little bit better. Now, I do think they'll be slightly better than what they were. It's kind of hard to go worse from 2-11, but nonetheless, I think their ceiling is 6 wins. And, just that culminated with a lot of other issues within that program. I think they're just going to get outworked by Florida. We have a much more talented roster, and we're at home. It's pretty hard to win in the Swamp, and, just the rivalry aspect of it. I think we're ready to go out there again and punch them in the mouth for the 2nd year in a row. And I think all things considered, Florida comes out of this thing on top. I can honestly say that I see Florida going 10-2. You've got the losses against Ole Miss and Texas. They're not very decisive losses. They're good losses, when they're going through the playoffs and they're giving their spiel. Well, this loss was a good loss. Not face value, no loss is a good loss. But, sports politics and things like that. But nonetheless, I can see Florida finishing this season at 10-2. Now, again, this is very contingent and very dependent on whether they carry over the success and they pick up where they left off this past season. Now, if you come out and you lay an egg and you look terrible your first couple weeks, then there might be a little bit of questions there. But I think if, and again, I'll reiterate this, if Florida continues where they left off last season, bowl win, rivalry win against Florida State, the 2 ranked wins at home, we can be 10-2. Now, I think the floor for this group, given the new freshmen that are coming in, given the development and the evolution of DJ Lagway, from year one being a starter now to year two. And given that this will really be his first complete season being a starter. He came in mid-season last year. Now he's going to get a full season under his belt. Given, DJ picks up where he left off with the playmaking ability and the good decision making, this team could be 10-2, like I said. But I would say at very worst, the floor is 8-4, 9-3. But if you go less than 8 wins, this season would be considered a colossal failure. But right now, I'm going to go 10-2 for Florida. One of the biggest takeaways from this potential 10-2 season is that I predict Napier to finally beat Kirby Smart. And I know that, since he's been hired, through all the ups and downs and the losses and all the, wanting him to get fired and things like that, the big civil war that's been going on between, the Mullen defenders and the Napier defenders is, there was always that question of, well, can he beat Kirby Smart? Because when you think back at it, Dan Mullen did that. 2020, we did beat them. So I think this year, Napier finally gets over the hump. He beats Kirby Smart. He can finally put those narratives to rest. And then we can kind of shorten that talent gap again. Because when you think back, I don't know, the last 4 or 5 years, that talent gap between Georgia and Florida has been about this big. Like, it has been a very, very wide margin. But I think when you look at the recruiting he's done and the development he's done and the eye for talent that he has in recruiting is just, that's undeniable. So I think when you kind of put all those things into perspective, if Napier can beat Kirby Smart, then I think he has solidified himself as better than Dan Mullen. So nonetheless, I digress. Florida 10-2 as the ceiling. I think we're 11-1. We're not going to be the SEC champions. I think the conference is still just way too competitive yet. I think we will definitely be a playoff contender. Maybe get one of the last couple seeds, but I don't see us being a conference title bid. But again, to reiterate again, 10-2 ceiling, spectacular season, 11-1. Your floor is 8-4, and then below that, you're a colossal failure, like I said earlier. So thank you all for joining. I will try to be down at the Orange and Blue game here in April, and I will be making a follow-up video based on what we see there. Thank you guys for joining in, and be sure to like and subscribe.